A janitor walks into the break room and casually speaks fluent Japanese. The CEO hears it and stops in his tracks. What he does next, no one, and I mean no one, saw coming. This true story will leave you speechless. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in a sleek, glass-paneled office tower in downtown Chicago. The city buzzed below as the first light of day spilled between the skyscrapers. Inside, the building was already coming alive. Elevator doors opened and closed like clockwork. Heels clicked on polished marble. Coffee cups steamed in the hands of busy professionals. It was business as usual. On the 18th floor, employees of Whitmore Enterprises rushed in, their minds already racing with meetings, deadlines, and emails. The air smelled like espresso and ambition. But while the office hustled and bustled, there was one man moving slowly, methodically, sweeping the lobby with a quiet focus that rarely drew attention. His name was Carlos Mendoza, the janitor. Dressed in a navy blue uniform, worn slightly at the elbows, Carlos moved through the corridors with a mop and a kind smile. Everyone knew him, at least in passing. He was the guy who always greeted people with a polite good morning and never missed a day of work, always on time, always quiet, always invisible in that way that janitors often are. But no one really knew Carlos. Not until that morning. Upstairs, the CEO himself, Mr. James Whitmore, was arriving early. He had a major investor call scheduled with clients from Japan, and he liked to be prepared. A crisp suit, his usual double espresso, and a thick folder of printouts in hand, he made his way toward the executive conference room. As he passed the break room, he heard something strange, something that made him stop mid-step. It was Japanese. Fluent, fluid, natural. James froze. Inside the break room, he could hear a conversation. Someone was clearly giving directions, in perfect Japanese. It wasn't just a few basic phrases. This was full-on native-level communication. Polite form, correct intonation, even cultural nuance. Curiosity got the better of him. James peeked into the room, and what he saw made his jaw drop. There, standing next to the coffee machine, was Carlos, the janitor, speaking calmly with a confused Japanese delivery man, helping him navigate the building. Carlos was gesturing politely, pointing toward the elevator, all while speaking a stream of polite Japanese that James himself could barely understand, even with a translator on speed dial. Carlos bowed slightly as the delivery man thanked him and left smiling. That's when James walked in. "Wait," James said, half laughing, trying to wrap his mind around what he just saw. "What did you just say?" Carlos turned, a little startled, but smiled. "Oh, just helping him find the right floor, sir." James blinked. That was Japanese, right? You speak Japanese? Carlos nodded humbly. "A little, yes." James looked completely baffled. "A little? That sounded like something out of a documentary?" Carlos chuckled, clearly modest. "I studied it on and off for a few years. Just picked it up." James took a step closer. "Carlos, how many languages do you speak?" Carlos hesitated. "Fluently?" "Yes." He looked up, thoughtful. 9. I speak 9 languages." James almost dropped his coffee. 9? Carlos nodded again, softly. "Spanish is my first, then English. I learned Japanese, French, Arabic, Russian, German, Mandarin, and Italian along the way. Mostly self-taught. Online videos, books, whatever I could get my hands on." There was a long silence. James, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar firm, stood there completely stunned, staring at the janitor he'd passed 100 times before, without ever giving a second thought. And in that moment, everything began to change. James Whitmore couldn't focus during the entire investor call. His thoughts kept drifting back to Carlos, the janitor, the quiet man with kind eyes who somehow spoke Japanese like a Tokyo native. James went through the motions of the video call, nodding, pitching numbers, discussing strategies. But in the back of his mind, one question echoed louder than any profit margin. Who really is Carlos Mendoza? The moment the meeting ended, James didn't even stop to grab another coffee. He left his corner office, eyes scanning the hallway like he was searching for a secret agent hiding in plain sight. And there he was, Carlos. Mopping the hallway just like always, his focus steady, movements smooth. He wasn't rushing, wasn't faking anything. Just doing his job, headphones in, humming softly to a tune only he could hear. James walked over slowly. "Carlos," he said, almost like he was testing the waters. "Can I ask you something?" Carlos paused, pulled out one earbud, and turned to him. "Of course, sir." "That earlier, in the break room, that was Japanese, right?" Carlos nodded. "You speak Japanese?" James asked, eyebrows raised. Still not sure if he'd imagined the whole thing. Carlos gave a small chuckle. "A bit, yes." James squinted. "A bit? Carlos, that was more than a bit. That sounded fluent." Carlos looked a little embarrassed and scratched the back of his head. "Well, I studied it for a few years on my own. Just kind of picked it up." James crossed his arms, curious now. "How many languages do you speak?" Carlos hesitated. You could see he didn't want to sound boastful. His eyes dropped for a second, and then he said quietly, 9. Fluently." James blinked. "I'm sorry, 9?" Carlos gave a shy smile and nodded again. "Yes, sir." James stood there, stunned. "You're joking." "No, sir," Carlos replied sincerely. "Spanish is my native language. Then I learned English when I moved here. Japanese came next, then French, Russian, Arabic, German, Mandarin, and Italian. I try to practice a little of each every day." It was like time froze for a moment. James wasn't just surprised, he was speechless. And for a CEO who dealt with high-stakes negotiations on the daily, that didn't happen often. Think about it. This man had been working at the company for over 3 years. He swept floors, cleaned windows, refilled paper towels, and not once had anyone taken the time to ask him about his story. And here he was, able to communicate with more than half the world's population. 9 languages, no formal training, no university degree, just raw determination and a hunger to learn. James finally exhaled and leaned against the wall, still trying to process it. "You could be doing anything with that kind of talent, Carlos," he said. Why this job?" Carlos looked up, calm and steady. "Because it's honest work. It paid the bills while I was learning. And honestly, sir, no one ever asked me what I was capable of." That line hit James like a punch to the chest. No one ever asked. It made him wonder how many other Carloses were hidden in plain sight, quietly carrying dreams and skills that no one had taken the time to notice. But now that James had noticed, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Something needed to change, and he was going to make sure it did.
That night, James Whitmore sat alone in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the glowing skyline of Chicago. The city never slept, but tonight it felt like it was whispering something he couldn't ignore. His mind kept circling, back to Carlos Mendoza, the janitor with the gift of languages. He replayed the break room moment over and over in his head, the ease with which Carlos had spoken, the confidence, the humility. James had spent his life surrounded by MBAs, Ivy League graduates, and multilingual consultants, and yet none of them had ever left him as speechless as Carlos had that morning. The next day, James made a call. "Carlos, do you have a few minutes?" he asked over the phone. "Of course, sir," Carlos replied, surprised but polite. James invited him up to the executive lounge, a place janitorial staff usually didn't enter. There were sweeping views of the city, soft jazz playing in the background, and a fresh pot of coffee waiting. Carlos sat down cautiously, still in his work uniform, a little unsure why he was there. James handed him a coffee and leaned forward. "Carlos, I want to know more. About you." Carlos blinked. "Me?" James nodded. "Your story. How does someone teach themselves 9 languages while working full-time?" Carlos took a deep breath, fingers wrapped around the warm mug. He looked out the window for a second, as if rewinding the film of his life. "I grew up poor in El Salvador," he began. "My family didn't have much. Some weeks we barely had food on the table. But we had one thing, an old radio that picked up international stations. I remember lying awake at night listening to voices in French, English, sometimes even Russian. I didn't understand a word, but I wanted to. He smiled faintly, lost in the memory. When I was 10, I found a torn-up English dictionary at a second-hand market. I carried that thing everywhere. Started learning words one by one, then phrases. I'd write them in a notebook I made out of scrap paper. I used to walk 3 miles to the only internet cafe in our town just to watch free language videos. James listened, captivated, not just by the words, but by the sheer willpower it must have taken. When I moved to the U.S., Carlos continued, I didn't have a degree. My English was okay, but I needed work, so I took the janitor job. It was stable, and I was grateful. But I never stopped learning. On my breaks, I'd study. At night, I'd watch videos, read, mimic accents. I'd even talk to myself in the mirror, practicing conversations in different languages. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. No classes? No tutors? He asked. Carlos shook his head. Just passion and patience. It hit James like a wave. This man, whom everyone passed by without a second glance, had created a university for himself out of nothing. No money, no privilege, just relentless curiosity. Carlos smiled, a little embarrassed now. Honestly, sir, I never thought anyone would notice. I just like learning, that's all. But James saw it clearly. This wasn't just a man who liked to learn. This was someone who had refused to let his circumstances define him. Someone who turned every spare moment into a stepping stone. Someone who had the kind of mindset that could change lives if only someone gave him the chance. And, in that quiet moment, sipping coffee with a janitor who spoke more languages than most diplomats, James made a decision. Carlos didn't belong behind a mop. He belonged in the boardroom, and James was going to make sure the world knew it. James had made up his mind. This wasn't just about giving Carlos a new job. It was about recognizing potential, the kind that too often goes unnoticed, hidden behind job titles and uniforms. And James? He wasn't about to let that continue, so he planned something bold, something unforgettable. The following Monday, the company gathered in the 18th floor auditorium for their usual weekly meeting. It was standard fare, project updates, department wins, and a few reminders from HR. People scrolled on their phones, half listening. But then, James took the stage. And everything changed. He looked calm, but inside, his heart was racing. Before we wrap up today, he said, I want to introduce someone you all know, but maybe haven't really seen. Murmurs rippled through the room. Carlos Mendoza, he called out. Would you please join me on stage? Everyone turned. Carlos, who had been quietly standing near the back in his janitor uniform, looked stunned. He hesitated, pointing at himself. Me, he mouthed. Yes, you, James smiled. Carlos slowly made his way to the front, mop still in hand, unsure of what was happening. He looked nervous, maybe even worried. Had he done something wrong? James placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and turned to the crowd. This man, he began, has been part of this company for years. Always on time, always kind, always working behind the scenes to keep this place running. But what most of you don't know, what I didn't know until last week, is that Carlos is not just our janitor. The room grew still. He is a linguistic genius, a self-taught polyglot who speaks 9 languages, fluently. Gasps echoed through the room. 9, James repeated, letting it sink in. Spanish, English, Japanese, French, Russian, Arabic, German, Mandarin, and Italian. All self-taught. No formal degree, no expensive courses, just hard work, dedication, and an unstoppable desire to learn. Carlos stood frozen beside him, eyes wide. People began whispering. Some had tears in their eyes. And today, James continued, his voice firm with pride, we are changing that job title. Effective immediately, Carlos Mendoza is no longer part of our janitorial staff. A pause. He is our new global communications officer. For a second, the room was completely silent. Then it erupted. Applause thundered through the auditorium. People stood up, clapping, cheering, some even crying. Phones came out, capturing the moment. A few longtime employees hugged each other in disbelief. Carlos looked around, overwhelmed. His hands trembled. Tears welled up in his eyes. He blinked, hard, as if trying to make sure it wasn't all a dream. "But sir, he began to say. James smiled and leaned in. "You earned it, Carlos. Every bit of it." From that moment on, Carlos's life changed in ways he never imagined. No longer in uniform, he started wearing a suit and tie. He got a new office, a team under him, and a passport that quickly filled with stamps. He began traveling the world, Tokyo, Paris, Dubai, Berlin, sitting in on meetings as the company's key interpreter. Clients loved him. His language skills were precise, but it was his calm presence and cultural sensitivity that won hearts. He even launched a new training program inside the company, teaching employees about global etiquette and cross-cultural communication. People who once walked past him without a glance now stopped him in the halls, asked for advice, thanked him for inspiring them. Carlos Mendoza, once invisible, had become the heart of the company. And it all started because one man paused, listened, and looked beyond the surface. Carlos's story didn't just change his life. It changed the world. Within days of James's announcement, someone from the office posted a short video of Carlos's promotion online. It showed the janitor turned executive standing on stage, stunned, surrounded by applause. That video went viral. News outlets picked up the story and ran headlines like, "From janitor to global officer, the man who taught himself 9 languages." The polyglot hidden in plain sight. Corporate America's most unexpected hero. Interviews poured in. Podcasts, TV shows, blogs. People across continents reached out. Students, teachers, immigrants, single parents, thanking Carlos for giving them hope. And yet, through it all, Carlos stayed exactly the same. He never bragged. Never acted like a celebrity. When asked how he felt about the attention, he'd smile gently and say, "It's not about being smart. It's about being curious. Anyone can learn something new, no matter their job, age, or background." It was a message the world desperately needed to hear. Carlos didn't just become a success story. He became a symbol for lifelong learners, for overlooked talent, for people stuck in jobs where their potential goes unseen. And the impact wasn't just emotional, it was tangible. Within a year of his promotion, Carlos had helped the company open new branches in Japan, Germany, and Brazil. He built bridges across cultures, eliminated language barriers, and negotiated deals that others couldn't. He became the CEO's most trusted global advisor. James, now frequently asked about Carlos at business summits, would smile and say, "Promoting. Carlos wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the best business decision I ever made." Inside the company, things changed too. Managers began talking to employees differently. HR launched new internal talent programs. The staff started to see each other in new ways. People began asking the quiet ones questions like, "What's your story? What do you love to do? What are you good at that no one knows about?" Carlos had awakened something bigger than himself. And as for him, he kept learning, kept growing. By the end of that year, Carlos had added 2 more languages to his arsenal, Portuguese and Korean. That brought his total to 11, and he wasn't stopping anytime soon. When a reporter asked him what his goal was now, he laughed and said, "Maybe 20, why not?" But perhaps the most beautiful part? Carlos never forgot where he came from. Started a foundation to provide free language resources to underprivileged youth, especially kids from Central America just like him. He visited schools, gave talks, and donated laptops, books, and scholarships, all because someone finally saw him. Carlos Mendoza was no longer just the janitor. He was a teacher, a leader, an inspiration, a reminder to us all that greatness can be found in the most unexpected places. If you were inspired by Carlos's story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more real-life stories, and drop a comment telling us what you're passionate about. Because who knows? Someone out there might just need to hear your story next.